Welcome. This is Professor Loushine, and this is my review for some readings from Module 4. So I went a little bit overboard. I would apologize, but I think it's beneficial. As I started reading the Rousseau paper, I decided to also do some reading in Klein, and then added a new paper that's not required for you, but I think it continues the exploration of these topics of issues of level in organizational research. And then I will review Imada, which is an extension of the macroergonomic papers, and then I'm going to actually relate it to a paper that I published at a conference proceedings in 2012. I think I presented in Toronto. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to highlight this copy. I don't know why. It's secured. It's just the first time I found that out. So what I did is I went through and I took some notes. And a few things that you get from this particular paper, it's got a lot of depth to it. And it's a lot to take in. This is sort of near the end of a master's degree, beginning of PhD. It's pretty complex, and so I'm going to try to break it down into, or basically give you what I want you to take away from it. Well, the justification is that organizations become increasingly differentiated, which means levels, both vertical, horizontal, and in this day and age, also spatial orientations or spatial distancing. You know, it's not all in one plant, and under this unprecedented time we're going through with the working from home, it adds extra layers of complexity as far as who gets to talk to who sees each other, and therefore can compare and contrast plans. Organizational behavior, different levels of human activity, retreat to, what is that? Is that retreat? I can't even, relevant to organizations. So, what they're basically saying is the assumption that, okay, this organization, I'm going to use the bad example of safety culture. This company has a great safety culture. Overall, within one area, based on metrics, what does it mean? And that's what the whole thrust of this article is getting toward. And that is that the level, whether you're upper management like corporate, middle management, supervisory level, or down on the floor, work on the plant floor, you have because of what your role is, your job expectations, it can inhibit or provide unique perspectives of what needs to get done, and unique perspectives of levels above, below, or horizontally, or possibly away from the site. And attempting to relate their perception of a particular concept, that is whether it's within their level or in a different level, we have to consider the natural biases, barriers, issues with contextuality, relevance, saliency. All these things play into part versus let's just survey everybody, see what shakes out at the end. Even if you get something significant, without taking care of where they interact or how they see things or how it relates to them, it may be a spurious connection or spurious statistical result. The author addresses problems with aggregation, so that with like cross-level research restricted to leadership and work unit design, it's limiting. It only provides you with a small part of the picture. I'm going to scroll to some pages here in a moment. Multi-level phenomena versus cross-level theory. They're not the same. They talk about conceptual problems and substantive issues, that the key factors that you should be looking at are learning, decision-making, structure, technical systems, productivity, and effectiveness, as far as how to measure how things are working. A lot of this type of research, organizational theory and research, is neither strictly micro or macro. If you were to look at a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap. And what the authors are saying is, traditionally, people either look at it from an individual or specific level, or organization-wide, and now there's overlap between you two. They influence each other. They tend to, and that's not being considered enough. Other issues that the authors address are the level of measurement and level of analysis. So how researchers, and they basically say out of convenience, they just survey everybody, and then they just add, take an overall mean and standard deviation and compare it to outcomes. And you can't do that because of the uniqueness within levels, both, again, vertically and horizontally, spatially too, maybe different sites have different things because it's such a complex system an organization is, and that's what they're getting at. Now I want to go to the biases and fallacies. Page 5 is where we're going to start. We're going to get into misspecification. There it is right there. So the base problem is misspecification. This occurs when we attribute an observed relationship to a level other than the actual behavior or response unit. I just talked about that. That again, they look at things, they see things differently. They really do. And the question we may be asking them, they can't answer in the way it's asked. So what does their answer mean? And I had brought that up when we talked about Zohar's 1980 safety climate. He based those elements of safety climate on previous work. That work was defined by experts. Survey done at a safety conference, they defined what it does, what influences more effective or better safety programs. The Smith group from NIOSH, they supplanted a lot of that language and looked for it from their perspective. Nobody asked the worker, what do you think? And that's why I think that Zohar's safety climate surveys, and I'm going to go over his 2005, they tend to collapse into one basic feel because the worker is not able to tease out all these different elements that experts do. It's like if you go into a restaurant and you had to fill out a survey about your meal that was developed by a master chef. They have so much more insight and view of what went into the meal and the nuances of flavors, the levels of flavors. Kind of as you ate it, it's like, yeah, I like it or I don't like it. I think that's what I'm trying to get at. Next is aggregation bias, and that's on page 6. Okay, so it talks about some statistic stuff here. Equally significant is the problem of spuriousness or aggregation bias. Spurious means you think that A causes B, but in fact A is related to C and C causes B. So it's spurious. It's not a direct relationship or a direct cause. It goes a different direction. Aggregation bias is the extent in which an apparent relationship is an artifact of data combination method. Yeah, that's basically what I said. The problem with spuriousness can be addressed statistically. It can through the choice of appropriate statistics. So let's go to the next one. It's cross-level fallacies. That's page 7. This represents a class of error researchers make. So false generalization from individual relations to a universe of intercollectivity relationships. This defines the issue I had with the Zohar 1980 paper. So it's just, we took an individual survey, we express it as an organizational measure in order to dictate and compare it to organizational numbers. Shouldn't do that. That's cross-level fallacy. The next is contextual fallacies. That's on page 9. Failure to specify the effects that social or physical settings have on the relationships between variables constitutes a contextual fallacy. So demonstrates aggregate data cannot be used to infer individual level relations. Okay, X affects Y. The last thing I want to go to is number 3 on page 31. So this is a very in-depth paper. I'm trying to simplify it. We're going to go to page 31, and I'm going to read number 3 for you. This is 30, 31. Number 3. These are data manipulation analysis issues. In cross-level research, typically the dependent variable is at the individual level and some independent variables are at the global variables related to higher levels. In such cases where corollary studies, analyses are conducted, all individuals in the same unit should be assigned the same global score for any global variable. That's something that Zohar refers to in his 2000 paper that I'm going to go over here in a moment. So if you are measuring things at the lower level and then you're making it a global outcome, the individual should line up with that. If they don't, if there's a lot of variance, then there is no relationship. That's basically what they're saying here. And they're just saying that some of the outcomes that are interpreted by researchers at the time, if they don't take into account these biases and fallacies, they're misinterpreting what's there and should actually go back and look at it again. I looked at the Klein paper, and there's a lot of similarity to Rousseau, and they actually cite it a few times. So there's confusion and controversy regarding the appropriate level of analysis for, and thus the appropriate conclusions to be drawn from. Research on topics as varied as performance appraisal, job design, training, pay, leadership, power, participation, communication, climate, culture, technology, organizational factors, and structure. You could throw safety in there. You could definitely throw safety in there. I don't think it's lacking due to any sort of purpose, but we're looking at it that way. They do call out the paper I just reviewed by Rousseau, and that she, because it's Denise, really focused the attention on only on the priority of scholars to undertake mixed levels. What they're saying is no, practitioners need to also account for these things. That you need to articulate what level you're focusing on and apply constructs that are duly contextualized to that particular focus. If we go beyond that paper, clarify the profound implications of specifying a given level or levels of a theory. Greater appreciation and recognition of these implications will, we show, enhance the clarity, testability, comprehensiveness, and creativity of organizational theories. So they're saying it goes even further than the researcher. And I'm not sure if I highlighted anything else other than another reference to Rousseau, the level to which generalizations are made. I'm talking about that. Levels of issues development. Theories must be built with explicit description of levels. You see, there's a common theme here of what they keep going back to. I think that's as far as I wanted to go with Klein. I think they give some really good examples of things. I mean, doesn't the paper start out with voting? Yeah, it does. So, in America here, we do like presidential elections or, nationwide federal elections. They use the Electoral College. Electoral College is meant to represent a sector. So it's like the same foundation of being a republic. You have representatives. So Electoral College votes are supposed to be representative of the population. However, some states, most states, it says I think 48 states, if the popular vote sways one way or the other just by a simple majority, all the Electoral College votes go to that candidate. Is that fair? Is that, it makes things easier, but it actually identifies two different elections, one in the 1960, one in the 1976, and you can throw the 2016 in there as well. The popular vote tends to align with the Electoral College win, but we're not seeing that every year. And if that's the case, as I'd stated in the Rousseau paper, you have to relook at it. And so two of the states do it by congressional district. So whoever wins the congressional district, they get the allotted electoral votes for it. It's a little bit more representative of a smaller area in order to determine the grand or overall North America, United States winner of that election. So it's interesting, you can take a look at that too. So let's talk Zohar. Zohar and Luria, 2005. This was one of the foundational studies to my dissertation. And so I actually used their updated safety climate model or survey instrument and customized it to my population for my dissertation. And what's great is Zohar is attempting to correct the fallacies and biases that affected his 1980 work. And you can see Rousseau's name is right here in one of the things he talks about. But again, I'm not sure if the elements of the survey, representative of safety climate, come from or align with the views of those who are surveyed. And at the end, he even points out that, we didn't differentiate between, there's organization, which is meant to be kind of everything above their heads from a worker perspective. They didn't single out supervisors. And they even bring up the importance of it. And that's something that I'm going to show in my paper that I did. So this continues on with, and so there's one thing that was confusing, and that is they're investigating the effect of routinization, formalization, or RF. I'm glad they turned it into RF because I can barely say it once. That basically means how formalized or cyclical or consistent a job is. What I mean by that, the worker doesn't have to make much choice. So a high RF job, you could just supplant in there Taylor's scientific management. It's so well defined and so specified that the worker doesn't have to think. They just do the job. And so the contention is when you have that, there isn't a lot of decision making into what the worker thinks of the job or what they think about safety because it's already built in. The more variability, the more complexity, the more reliance on the worker to make decisions to get it done. Therefore, there's more external influences or experiential situational influences on safety climate. That's what their theory is. You can look at these models that they tested. I think I highlighted stuff later on that I'd like to get to. So, first, organizational level climate must predict group level safety behavior, percentage safe, after controlling for risk level. We're comparing two things here. We're saying group level, we're saying individual numbers represented over a bigger span. That's aggregation bias. Organizational climate must also predict group level, but isn't it supposed to be the other way around? Shouldn't group level be more predictive of organization level? I think he's kind of flipping it there. The relationship between organizational climate and behavior must be significantly reduced or eliminated after controlling for group level risk. I think that this could be better defined. So we get to the discussion, and you see I'm kind of skipping through stuff, but let's get to what they're really talking about. Okay, so they say that this model they are presenting employees interpret or appraise institute policies and procedures by construing them as facet-specific patterns indicative of the priorities of compelling organizational goals at their workplace. Do they really know? That seems awfully complex for your everyday worker to do. I think they've got other things on their minds. There's a lot of competing things in their lives, not just work, personal lives. There are situational things that influence. There are environmental things that influence. There are coworker issues that influence. It's very much an oversimplification. Implementation takes place through supervisory practices that provide in turn the main source of group level climates in individual subunits. That tends to be, and that's something that they should have studied. That is, in their individual role as members of an organization and of the subunits of that organization, employees tend to attend to formal procedures and to supervisory implementation of those procedures, setting the stage for complementary consensual perceptions with regard to both. And I can see where that RF influences this definition here. For example, if supervisors repeatedly make safety procedures contingent on production pressures, workers will infer low safety priority, even if management over policy is that safety is a top priority. So it's something we had talked about before that, but the thing is, people don't get hurt on purpose. What they do is they may lax in the effort to maintain certain safety rules in priority of getting the job done. And many times we put it up to the worker to make that decision unknowingly. And then it looks like an error, but it was actually management's error. Just as scientific inquiry requires collaborative effort, individual employees in the work organizations must interact in order to create mutual understanding of extracted cues. The thing is, though, if something negative happens to one worker and they share it with others to which they relate and care for, they adopt those same viewpoints towards management. That isn't discussed. Given the assumption that organizations present employees with compelling operational demands stemming from the inherent conflict between quantity and quality, the notion that employees must face complex and often conflicting cues seems to suggest the rule rather than the exception. So here he's actually confirming what I had just talked about. And I guess maybe you could interpret that from here. It begins here and it ends here. So this is a very important concept. And then he gets into directions for future research. So he's what's the word? Prognosticating to what could be done in the future. The concept of supervisory practice as discretionary implementation of formal policies and procedures can be expanded to include mid-level managerial practices, serving as reference for supervisor perception. So he's now attending to more of the complexity of the organization or the levels. Supervisors whose immediate supervisors put greater emphasis on safety will execute formal safety procedures more diligently than those whose superiors are less interested in these issues. And that's going to come out in the Amata paper. It is possible to collect multi-level safety climate data also from frontline supervisors. So they should have, I think. I think that would have been a more defining way to do it. This may create a three-level climate structure for workers to appraise of their organization. It would be interesting to see, because you would expect almost that the supervisory opinions of the organization would be less variant than the worker because of their distance from upper management. The climate variability data in our sample suggests that although the organization and group climates are globally aligned, resulting in full mediation effects of the safety behavior in work groups, there's also significant variance, implying cross-level discrepancies. So they are admitting here that although maybe they found some significance, that, there's also evidence for the support that Rousseau and Klein had talked about. Analysis of the raw data indicates that among discrepancy group climates, almost 85% were higher than the organizational climate, indicating that supervisors were more committed to safety than those at the top. So it's probably something they should have included in their work. So I'm going to stop there with that. Not stop altogether, though, people. Stick with me, even though we're at the 23-minute. I've got two more papers to look at. Let's look at mine first, and then I'll go to the Imada. So this was not my dissertation. This was pre-dissertation and kind of gave me some ideas to implement. And so what I did is I attempted to study safety at a facility from a work system construct, the same work system we talked about in this class. And the questions that I borrowed were from this researcher and expert out in Oregon, Dan Miller. Because he was actually another influence that I had of going back to graduate school. So as you can see, a lot of the papers that I cite are similar to the papers I've had you read. And let's see. So we get to the macroergonomics, safety culture and safety climate. When I read this, it's a lot of things I've been saying already, and I would just be repeating myself. And I talk about the reason why I did it. My methods are long because I want people to be able to replicate it. And then this is a summary of one part of the data that I broke down. So this is all interviews. Other than the demographics, the interviews yielded certain answers. Same way I analyzed your definitions for culture and reported them to you. So when you add these up, they don't always add up to the proper number. So a few things that came out of this, the results. And the whole idea is that the greater the the greater the discrepancy or the difference in the viewpoints between workers, supervisors, and top management, that is a source for error, which we'd find as either injury or quality things or something like that. Because there's a lack of understanding. Discrepancy means differencing of opinion or differencing of expectation. So one result was that management seemed to indicate that if they just do their job, follow rules, then workers won't get hurt. Whereas what supervisors recommended was, they try to be on time. Caregivers said they like to have fun with the clients and treat the clients like family. So there's a differing of opinion here in how they program and plan out their day. It seems to be time dependent. Found a lot of workers and supervisors defining the issue of just trying to get the job done versus try to get it done safely. They put the caregiver safety above their own. Like I said right here, that's just part of my job. I actually took excerpts to try to define. And since workers believe that it's just part of their job, they take it as, if you don't perceive something as a risk, why would you try to correct it? Whereas management just felt, just follow the rules, everything will be fine. Supervisors did not say that. They said it's difficult to do. They can just call me for help. The workers thought being aware of the surroundings, talk to each other would help, but a lot of them just don't know. They don't know. Workers felt that they're required to overexert themselves on a daily basis, that they're constantly being hurried. And these were both if you were to get to a root cause, expecting that they're going to have to overexert themselves or expecting to be hurried were the primary root causes for why injuries occurred. And most of them did believe that it was more punishment based. And so they feared coming forward. And so what management think workers should do and what workers do because they perceive it differently was a major finding here. It agreed with what I had just covered with you. I did address study limitations as I should. So the two big things that came out of this is you can study multi-level, but it is really difficult. I tried to let the workers define safety from their perspective, but it became an expectation of the job that they get hurt. How can you protect yourself when it's an expectation? You know what I mean? There was a high level of blame perceived by workers, which means their communication was inhibited, even with supervisors, because several of them indicated they viewed their supervisors top management. They didn't know the difference. So you guys can take a look at this if you'd like, but it just basically provides a confirmation to a lot of things I've talked about in this class. So let's go to the last one, and that was with Amata. I told you I really like Amata. Gives a lot of credit to Heinrich and Klein. It was in their book. He defines what macroergonomics is and relates it to human error, performance, things like that. A lot of the same concepts come up. One of the justification is that there's a tendency to, one, blame the worker, two, well, let's either punish them or train them. Does that sound familiar to everybody? And how that is the wrong way to look at it. Recommends considering three different approaches. That is situation-based, management-based, human-based, and basically the argument is human-based is not done enough. No single factor is sufficient, and gives some examples here. Feeling rushed. That's one thing I looked at in mine too. So they also get into this Nakamachi results, this Akamisu effects, considering cognition, which do they have the knowledge and skills to do the job. It goes back to other things we had talked about, right? Human error talked about that. High involvement management talked about that. Value judgment refers to the operator's opinions of safety and regulations, and then affect, which is their feelings, emotional state. Managers needs to focus on identifying risk in the work environment, improving these risky conditions, supporting the quality circle Kaizen. I guess I shouldn't have highlighted that. Psychologists have long recognized that our predisposition or our attitude toward a specific events, objects, or persons have three components: behavioral, cognitive, and affective. Affective. I think we tend to focus too much on the behavioral and not what thoughts went into it and how they feel about it. And that's one thing the work system model, when I rearrange it, allows me to do. And the feeling, that could just be perceptual. It doesn't really get into the different states of actual affect. Because few humans willfully hurt themselves, the omnipresent human error and accidents might be attributed to inattention or temporal affective conditions. But they're making what they do is they make an argument that it's a systems thing. System influences it. And you see, I have some written notes in my book. Talks about system thinking. That's a natural next progression. It shifts the focus away from the singular causal events to a more realistic systems level thinking. It may cause people to look at an injury event as a chaotic process, so a unique process. Is it unique that led to an injury, or was it the same thing with just a slight variance? I think more the latter, and I think that's what Reason's chapter talked about, referring back to earlier work. I'm not going to get into the chaos of systems. Just going to keep scrolling down here. So the intervention. So this is what they did, and they broke it down really good, and this would be the part I would focus on if I were you. First, employee involvement. We've talked about this quite a bit. You guys agree with this. Safety programs can and should be implemented through employee participation. Remember the Cox paper? That's the justification that I use. The thrust of this recommendation was to empower employees to recognize, solve, and promote solutions to their safety problems. This is very much ingrained in socio-technical systems as well. But you have to give them the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and hopefully motivate them with reward. One example of increasing the organization's ability to respond to its environment was hiring of new product drivers with safety performance as a major factor in the selection process. So we had talked about that, didn't we? About the hiring process. Who are you hiring? Who are you bringing in? And are there characteristics you can identify in applicants that will put them in a greater propensity to be aware of safety and care about it? Poorly designed delivery sites were the cause of frustration, stress, and other issues. So they actually did some redesign. Talks about rewards, participative ergonomics, equipment design, having an actual curriculum that they can go through that's taught by master drivers. Almost sounds a little bit scientific management-ish, but not really. It talks about better communication, which is very important. Management sharing information on future programs so that workers both can contribute and see it coming. Focusing on the accomplishments when discussing safety, positive feedback. Better communication across levels. Non-technical skill training is also really important. You need to know how to learn before you can learn. Creating a more participative, open environment, allow the company to get more buy-in. Agreed. And then integrating safety into different parts. So it's not an addition to what you have to do or something additional you have to think about. It's integrated into all aspects: capital budget, personnel issues, bidding of trucks, business plans, career development, and goals and vision. Fostering teamwork, another big part of integration. And then he basically expresses the almost extraordinary improvements that were made. 70% lower frequency rate, 63% less injury rate in motor vehicles, lowering the costs, and it being up to like 5% of their overall budget, I think is what it says. That's just 5% less. Wait, the number of work loss days was less than 5%. So 95% improvement, excuse me. And costs 30% lower. Okay, here it is. The savings are conservatively estimated to be 5% of the region's operating budget, compounded annually over 9 years. That's impressive. That is going to catch everybody's attention. So I went over a lot, but I hope you see the interrelatedness of it, especially as you look at the other assigned papers. There's some consistencies in what they're talking about. And if you can identify that stuff and really tease it out, that's what's the most important thing. And that's where safety's going. I mean, relate this stuff that was published in the 80s, 90s, the early 2000s to what is published today when they talk about safety 2.0, safety differently, HOP, it's the same thing. I told you that this stuff was known a while ago, but then they're repackaging it into pretty things, and then it's being, publicized. And that's really what I think we're seeing here. So by reading the foundational work, you're seeing where it came from versus when it's packaged in these new pretty things. You're like, oh, look at this brand new idea. Not a new idea. But I think it's better to look at the foundational work. You can't just look at a house and go, oh, they must have a good foundation. It's a good looking house. Go look at the foundation. Look at the bones of the house. Look at the electrical. Look at the HVAC. That's what's going to cost you later on. That's what makes the house function, not just what it looks like. All right, that's all I got. See you on the discussion boards.